Hey guys, Zack here, and this is my review of Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated. Okay, so before I actually start the review, I do want to clarify that the reason I'm doing two reviews of this today instead of the usual one is that starting next week, I'm going to be starting a massive project that I'm hoping you guys will actually stick around to see. It's a very big project. It's going to be similar to a previous project that I've done, but you guys will be seeing that very soon. I will have more details for you guys very soon, but it's currently still in the final stages of planning, so I'm finishing that up. But in any case, yeah, because of that, I'm going to be taking a break from Mystery Incorporated for a bit. But in the time being, I figured I would just finish reviewing the first season for you guys, so that we can just go into that and put a pin in that without any real loose ends to tie up, and yeah, then we can just go on and move on to the project. And then when I get back from the project, I will be doing that. I will once again be doing I will once again go back to reviewing Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated. But in any case, yeah, what an interesting episode to actually end on. So yeah, this final episode, All Fear the Freak, is actually a really interesting episode in that it's the one in that it kind of ties off the main central mystery behind the first season of Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated, and it kind of continues where the last one left off, to kind of explain where it kind of more further explains what actually happened to the original Mystery Incorporated. Obviously in the previous episode we discussed how they didn't actually disappear, but they were actually driven out of town. But this episode further explains how the Freak of Crystal Cove actually drove them out of town, and sure enough, he is actually the central villain of the episode. But in case, this episode actually winds up opening it up 20 years prior, where the original Mystery Incorporated are going through an old tunnel, presumably underneath the old Spanish church, and because that was what was established last episode to be under the Spanish church. There's just this big relief in the floor that opens up when you step on it, and yeah, it's opened up to this big whole open tunnel to the tunnels underneath Crystal Cove, and sure enough, what they're actually currently looking for, they do eventually find it. But what they find is a big chest on a pile of skulls, and with Mr. E, not Mr. E, but Professor Pericles just kind of leading the charge on it seems, and he's notably a little manipulative of the kids. He kind of just pushes them around a little bit, and is just kind of driving. And to be fair, that is kind of his whole that has been established to be his kind of personality, where he's just like driven by the fact, he's a very driven person, or bird, I guess, but he's a very driven bird, and is very and it kind of shows that he may not have had the healthiest relationship with his kids. But yeah, in any case, they wind up underneath the church, and there's this giant pile of skulls with a chest on it, and of course, Cassidy Williams immediately goes into go and investigate, but Professor Pericles stops her, and when she asks him why he stopped her, he merely points out that he was just trying to save her life, and then reveals that the entire thing is booby-trapped, and much to Ricky's fear and chagrin, pointing out that there's no way they're actually going to get close to it, and sure enough, realizing he's the only one who can actually reach the treasure chest on top without setting off the booby trap, he then asks Judy for her necklace, which she kind of reluctantly gives him, and he then uses it to actually fly up over the chest on top, and proceeds to open it, pulling open the chest with the locket, which may explain how it was actually just underneath the caverns, because it got separated from her when she was when Professor Pericles went to go open the chest. And sure enough, they then proceed to find a piece of the Planispheric Disk inside, and none of the kids fully understand what it is they're actually looking at, but Professor Pericles does fully understand it, and then proceeds to scoop up the disc rather greedily, but this winds up setting off another booby trap that proceeds to actually flood the caves where they are, and barely escape. I should mention they barely manage to get out, and of course the second they scoop up the disc, Professor Pericles, they get out safely. Professor Pericles scoops up the disc from Brad, who's trying to get a better look at it, and points out that notably there should have been more. He does point out there should have been more pieces, and is curious where the other 5 are. But as he's trying to contemplate where they can where the other 5 are possibly located, they're actually seemingly attacked by the Freak of Crystal Cove. And cut to the present day, where Velma is currently vlogging on her computer, blogging on her computer, seemingly, and Angie Dinkley comes in and tells her she needs to get off her computer because it's almost time for bed, and she and Velma openly agrees to that, but in actuality, she's messaging the rest of Mystery Incorporated online to get them to meet up at midnight. And of course everybody immediately stops what they're doing and immediately makes preparations to leave during midnight. And Fred, I should mention, is currently welding a trap of some sort. It's not clearly shown what trap he's making, but of course he notices that that now that it's midnight, he needs to actually prepare. So he then proceeds to go downstairs and tell his dad that he's getting ready to go to bed. But when he comes down, he actually sees his father standing in front of the fireplace, holding the picture of his mom that he keeps on the mantle. And Fred notably asks his dad if he misses her, which actually causes Fred Sr. to jump out of his skin because he didn't realize his son was there. And he does have a bit of a panic attack and threatens Fred Jr. if he does that again, he'll shoot him. But he then also points out that he didn't mean to snap at Fred, but points out that admittedly, even though he doesn't approve of several other things he does, specifically the fact that he likes traps, the fact that he likes building, the fact that he likes solving mysteries, and a couple of the other things he doesn't really approve of, he does point out that at the end of the day, even if he isn't really good at showing it, he does love his son, and with that proceeds to put the picture back on the mantle, and proceeds to go back upstairs and go to bed. But with Fred Jr. then remarking that he's gonna turn in as well. But then in actuality that's a lie, and what he's actually doing is stealing his dad's keys. And sure enough, they then proceed to meet up in front of Town Hall at midnight. But with Fred still being skeptical about the fact that his father has anything to do with the Planispheric Disk. Especially since he doesn't really believe his dad is involved in anything shady, there has been a little bit of evidence to the contrary so far. So I don't think Fred. I think Fred is just talking from a very biased position here. But Daphne reassures him that of course he doesn't. She does point out that it isn't okay to keep secrets. And Velma, quickly not picking up on the fact that Daphne is not so subtly talking about her, points out that she was keeping it a secret for a reason, pointing out that they just weren't ready to actually know that Cassidy Williams and Angel Dynamite were in fact the same person, and points out that she had to make a choice, but of course Shaggy then proceeds to point out that she chose Cassidy over them, and basically Velma just tells him that he's one to talk since he quite literally picked a dog over her. But in case of that, they then make preparations to actually sneak into Town Hall and start exploring Fred Sr.'s office to try and figure out any sort of information that they're doing. And in the process, Fred Jr. reveals that he actually pocketed the picture of his mom and places it on Fred Sr.'s desk while they're working. And at one point, they accidentally set off a cabinet, which winds up opening, and this all actually winds up setting off a secret compartment in Fred Sr.'s desk, which it exposes the secret document that's been hiding in his the secret document he was looking at, which is revealed to actually be the Planispheric Disk document that the original Mystery Incorporated found. And also because of that, the picture of Fred's mom actually winds up breaking, and when he goes to pick it up, he then realizes something very strange, and that's the picture of his mom is actually a magazine clipping, and which confuses him greatly, and he has no idea why it's actually a magazine clipping. Which, so yeah, very, very interesting there. But in any case, Velma then opened it up. Velma then opens up the document and discovers, yes, it is indeed the picture of the Planispheric Disk that he noticed that they picked up. And they also note that Fred Sr. has seemingly made a drawing of his own piece and is just placed inside the document, because obviously he doesn't have his own piece anymore because Pericles stole it. So he made a paper replica to use with the document in its stead. So yeah, it's clear Fred Sr. had a backup in case it got stolen. So so while Pericles didn't ultimately steal the disc piece, it didn't really set him back all that much, and he's clearly still has what he needs to actually find the other pieces. But in case it's at this point where they realize they now have what they need, where the group then realizes they have what they need, and decide to actually split and go looking for and get out of town hall with the document that they now have. And but as they're leaving, they actually start hearing a cackling, and when they turn around, they notice a strange shadow behind them, and then they turn around and they see the freak at Crystal Cove, who properly introduces himself before demanding they give him their piece. And Fred, quickly realizing that this is indeed the same monster that attacked the original Mystery Incorporated, it orders the gang to run, and the rest, and it's at this point where the freak at Crystal Cove chases them through town hall, and they do eventually manage to outrun the freak, but they actually wind up running into Sheriff Stone, who is standing nearby with a police squad, and notably has the entire police force with him. And sure enough, immediately after the scene, the rest of the Mystery Incorporated are incarcerated, and the parents start arguing among themselves. They don't fully understand. They kind of want to all blame each other for going wrong and actually teaching and actually parenting all of their kids, but they don't really know. They don't really have any real sort of way. Like, obviously, you've got the Blakes who are very like, not my daughter is perfect, and then you've also got Angie Dinkley, who kind of is like, okay, everybody just calm down, drink some tea, we'll be fine, and then you've got the Rogers, who are very upper class and are very much like, yeah, no, that's not gonna work. And obviously our son is obviously he's a piece of work, but yeah, and eventually the parents then protest to Sheriff Stone to let them go, but of course Sheriff Stone refuses, since they're actually, according to himself, the repeat offenders, and he's not wrong in that. In their first ever appearance, they were in fact arrested. So he does have a very good point that Mr. Inc. has been causing some problems for him and his law enforcement buddies. But it's at this point where Fred Sr. actually tells him to actually let the kids go, and pointing out that obviously it's not he's not going to press charges because it's his son, and of course Sheriff Stone reluctantly lets him go. At which point, immediately after they let go, Fred Jr. tries to apologize to his dad about the fact that they they basically just broke into his office, but he isn't having none of it. In his own words, he can't hear his son because his ears are stuffed full of disappointment. So yeah, he's not particularly happy about the fact that his son broke into his office and is just disappointed in him. But especially since immediately prior to this, he told his son that he loved him. So yeah, Fred Sr. is having a bit of a whiplash of emotions here. He's not, he's happy, he does love his son, but he's also disappointed that he went behind his back to break into his office. Not happy with that. But yeah, in any case, it's at this point where the Blakes actually decide that Fred is actually a negative influence, and pointing out that the Mystery Incorporated is obviously doing more harm than good, or at least from their perspective. They decide that Daphne is no longer allowed to see Fred and tries to take her away, but Daphne outright refuses, and then in a spur of the moment thing where she points out that they can't split them up, she then reveals the engagement to everybody in the room, which causes much to the confusion of both Mystery Incorporated as well as all the parents, and notably Barty actually winds up fainting, but when he finds out that the two of them are actually engaged, and of course, it's at this point where Daphne points out that yes, she does indeed very much love Fred, and that and the two of them are indeed engaged, and that they're planning to get married after high school. With Fred adding, after a bit of prodding from Daphne, that he does in fact, though he rather humorlessly admits that she's tied with like 4 other things for his favorite thing. He does admit that he loves Daphne and wants to spend the rest of his life with her, and is more than happy to just kind of continue writing with her and solving mysteries with her and all the other things that he loves for the rest of his days. And but of course this is this point where Nan and Barty Blake don't really have any idea of how to actually cope with this, so they then decide to actually split up the Mystery Inc. again, pointing out that obviously they need to think things through. They need Daphne to think things through and decide to haul her off anyway. And Fred tries to grab out and reach her, but his dad intervenes, and they're ultimately dragged apart. But Fred ultimately has a backup plan on the off chance that they're actually on the off chance they actually need to escape. So he tells Velma to scoop up the documents so that they can actually escape with that, and tells Shaggy and Scooby to guard their piece of the Planispheric Disk in their room. So, and of course, the three of them immediately go on their marching orders, and before they're all grounded. Notably, Shaggy and Scooby are locked in their room without a midnight snack, and it's at this point where the Rogers then proceed to wonder if there's something they're doing wrong as parents, and since obviously nothing they've tried is working, they wonder if they should try the nuclear option. And of course, this is this point where Scooby bemoans the fact that they haven't gotten a midnight snack, at which point Shaggy just wonders if he hoped he managed to stock up the backup fridge. And sure enough, what we find out is that very much, and this is very in character for Shaggy and Scooby, but as it turns out, Shaggy had built a fridge into his bed on the off chance that they would actually be grounded in their room without food. So yeah, he then proceeds to flip up his hide-a-bed and reveals that there's actually a fridge built into the bottom of it. And but in case as they're making food, they then proceed to check on their piece of the Planispheric Disk, which, as it turns out, is actually being stored in the backup fridge alongside all their food. And after knowing that it's safe and sound, they then get prepared to make themselves some food and get ready to just hunker down for the long term while they kind of just wait out their grounding. But as they do, they actually hear a cackling, and sure enough, they turn around to discover that the freak of Crystal Cove has actually followed them home, and is indeed after their piece of the Planispheric Disk and demands to see it. And of course, Shaggy and Scooby, quickly realizing that they can't let the freak have their piece of the Planispheric Disk, immediately run through the house and out and jump out the window, also interrupting Shaggy's parents' still life night, which, as we find out later, and as implied in the scene, they just run through their still life night, possibly messing up their shot, and proceed to just run out the bedroom window, and where they're actually cornered by the freak again, but so they just run deeper into the forest where they run deeper in, where they're actually scooped up by Ed Machine in his convertible, and he tells them to get in, and of course they immediately do that. And what we find out is that and there's actually a scene before this that I forgot to mention, but what we find out is that Angel had actually called Mr. E and let them and told them that the group was in trouble and that the freak was after them. So he sent Ed Machine to pick them all up and bring them to Chris and bring them to K-Ghoul, which of course causes them to have a bit of mixed feelings, since obviously Angel lied to them about her true identity. Of course, obviously she's lied to them about who she really is, but she then points out that for very obvious reasons, she just wants to see them safe, but also more importantly, points out that she and Mr. E have actually dealt with the freak in the past, and points out that they very much are going to need her and Mr. E's help to actually deal with the freak and take him down. And actually proposes a truce with Mystery Incorporated, pointing out that, well, they don't necessarily need to trust her. They do point out that since the chips are down, they might as well work together. But and of course, Mystery Incorporated seems like they're going to work with Angel at first, but then Fred suddenly locks her in her studio and tells her that they're actually going to be working on their own, pointing out that the adults in this town have caused a lot of problems, and they need to be able to work things out. They need to be able to deal with this when the adults have clearly failed. So, and of course, he then proceeds to escort Fred then proceeds to escort the rest of Mystery Incorporated into the van, into the mystery machine, and they proceed to actually get ready to drive off and go, and with Fred not really explaining where they're going, he just gets them all into the mystery machine and drives away. And of course, Angel immediately calls up Ed Machine and lets them know what happened. But by this point, Ed is already home, and more to the point, he actually left his phone in the car, so he doesn't hear it. But and this is actually a very chilling scene, I should mention. This is probably one of the more chilling scenes in the whole episode, and possibly the whole series up to this point. But when he actually arrives home, he discovers that Professor Pericles is actually waiting for him, who kind of greets him like an old friend, sort of, and then also proceeds to ask him to send a message to Mr. E. But also finally implies and outright confirms that Mr. E and Ricky are indeed the same person. Something that I've been speculating and has been somewhat confirmed, but hasn't been outright said up until now. But of course Ed wants nothing to do with Professor Pericles and tells him to just say his message and then get out. But it's at this point where Professor Pericles reveals that Ed misunderstood him and he doesn't want to say anything. At which point, he then viciously attacks Ed Machine, and it just pans out, and we don't see what actually happens to Ed Machine. So, yeah, it's implied that Professor Pericles just viciously attacks Ed Machine in his home, and it's not clear what happens to Ed Machine after this point, but considering the wiki stops listing his appearances after this point, I think Ed Machine might be dead. Just being perfectly honest. He probably got killed by Professor Pericles, as it seems. But yeah, this is kind of morbid and dark. But then again, this is a very different take on the series. So I guess I should have expected that. But in any case, it's at this point where Mystery Incorporated then proceed to arrive at the old Spanish church, which as Fred points out is where the mystery began, where the old mystery began, and where they're going to end it. And then asks Daphne to get him some of his ropes and other things from his tool making bag, because they're going to rappel down into the relief into the bottom of the Spanish church. And Daphne immediately goes to go get his churching stuff, but she also notices that Fred currently has a picture of his mom, and is wondering why he currently still has it, and is very confused. But in any case, the rest of the gang then proceed to climb down into the caves underneath the old Spanish church, and it's at this point where the gang then proceeds to talk about Fred and Daphne's engagement. With Velma obviously being very confused about when she was actually going to tell the rest of them that they were engaged. But of course, Daphne points out that obviously Velma and Shaggy kept their relationship secret for quite a while before telling everybody, and of course then points out that obviously she shouldn't be one to judge. But in any case, they do eventually arrive at the old trap, where they do eventually try and figure out where the old. But in case, this is this point where they actually try to figure out where the old piece of the Planispheric Disk is, and realizing that they need to they obviously and realizing. But in case, it's at this point where they then tried to figure out where the piece of the Planispheric Disk is, where the other pieces of the Planispheric Disk is, and pointing out at which point Velma has a bit of a brainstorm and realizes that, hey, Professor Pericles was able to figure this out without any pieces. And quickly, and wondering how exactly it was he was able to do that, they then pull out their document, as well as the piece of the Planispheric Disk that they have and the paper one that Mayor Jones made, and quickly realize that they can use the two pieces of the Planispheric Disk that they quote unquote have to actually figure out coordinates for the other remaining pieces of the Planispheric Disk. And And sure enough, they then eventually put the two pieces together and shine a light through them to figure out that there's actually numbers, and conclude that there's other numbers on the pieces that Pericles presumably wrote on the document himself, and wonder if there's anything that on the document that actually matches what the pieces are actually showing them, and eventually Scooby does wind up finding it. And at Velma's request, then starts putting it into her GPS and points them in the general direction of where they need to go. And eventually, they wound up at the exact same booby trap that the original Mystery Incorporated found their original piece. And of course, we know there's nothing there, but the new Mystery Incorporated doesn't know that yet. And proceed to arrive, and after quickly arriving there, Fred quickly disarms the traps and immediately climbs up to the top to actually open the chest. And sure enough, he quickly discovers there's nothing in there. But at which point it's at this point where Professor Pericles actually closes in on them and tells them that it's very good to see them again. And of course, he then proceeds to also not so subtly point out that now that he's sorry for leading them on a wild goose chase, but now he has them alone with their remaining piece, so that he can easily steal it from them without much outside interference. But of course the gang then point out that they're not going to give him their piece of the Planispheric Disk, but he points out that they have nothing to fear as long as they give it to him. But it's at this point where they hear a voice that says otherwise, and Professor Pericles turns around and discovers that the Freak of Crystal Cove is actually standing behind him, and sure enough, it knocks him out. It knocks him into one of the stalactites, and immediately attacks the rest of Mystery Incorporated, and after pushing over Velma and knocking her glasses off, it manages to sweat the piece from her and runs out of the cave, with Velma telling Fred to hurry up and chase after the freak because he's currently running away with the piece, and Fred, quickly realizing that the chest is actually attached to a series of booby traps, decides to actually stop the Freak of Crystal Cove old school style, as he puts it, and proceeds to kick the chest and throw it, which causes the big flood trap from when it originally set off to go off, and of course, Mr. Incorporated and the Freak of Crystal Cove are actually almost swept out onto the rocks, but the freak manages to cling to the side of the cliff and proceeds to actually climb up. And Fred immediately chases after him, trying to climb up to him, and eventually grabs him by the leg, saying that he finally caught him. But the freak starts kicking him off and eventually succeeds, and Fred almost falls to his death. But surprisingly, the freak actually winds up catching him and pulls him to safety. At which point the freak remembers, oh right, I'm a bad guy, I'm not supposed to be saving my enemy, and proceeds and starts running away from Fred, who fly tackles him and puts him into a headlock. And it's at this point where Sheriff Stone shows up, having received panicked calls from several people. I'll say mainly all of the parents and Angel Dynamite, who all called them, told them what was going on, and more to the point, he just shows up with many questions and has no idea who or what is going on. But he does wind up arresting the Freak of Crystal Cove, and asks Fred and the other kids to actually explain, because obviously he has a big laundry list of questions that he needs answered. So it's at this point where Fred actually reveals that the Freak of Crystal Cove, and rather begrudgingly, I admit, the Freak of Crystal Cove is none other than Fred Jones Sr., his own father, and proceeds to unmask the Freak of Crystal Cove to reveal this fact. And of course, everybody is very shocked to discover that the mayor of Crystal Cove is actually the bad guy. But of course, Fred Sr. is very curious as to what exactly gave him away. But Fred points out that he had a couple of suspicions. But namely, he points out that the main one he had was that the newspaper, the article that he found with the picture of his quote unquote mother, had a date on it that was the exact same date that was supposedly Fred's birthday, and then proceeds to the man that Fred Sr. give him some answers and figure out why he did it. And it's at this point where Fred Sr. reveals that there's a very good reason why he did it. He wanted the piece of the Planispheric Disk to find the supposed cursed treasure that the conquistadors had hidden in Crystal Cove, and of course he immediately explains that he had been investigating the piece on his own without any such luck until the original Mystery Incorporated showed up with their document, And he quickly realized that the only person who actually knew anything about what the document was Professor Pericles. And Professor Pericles, obviously, he wanted the pieces for himself as much as Fred Sr. did. So he decided to actually portray the rest of the original Mystery Incorporated to work with Fred Sr. and actually kind of get them kicked out of Crystal Cove. And sure enough, Fred Sr. actually created the Freak at Crystal Cove costume to scare away the original Mystery Incorporated, while also using various forged documents to kind of threaten all the rest of Mystery Incorporated with legal trouble. And basically just threaten all their parents we already know this, but threaten all their parents on the off chance they actually decide to come back. And of course, this winds up scaring off the most of Mystery Incorporated. But it's at this point where we actually find out that Fred Sr., in an effort to kind of cover up all of his loose ends, then portrays Professor Pericles by knocking him out and calling the authorities. And this is how Professor Pericles actually develops his signature scar. But of course, Professor Pericles immediately is knocked out by Fred Sr., and who calls the cops and has him arrested and hauled off to the animal asylum for the criminally insane in the time that he's actually unconscious. By the time he wakes up, he's already been incarcerated, and as Fred Jones Sr. puts it, he's in the place where all birds belong, a cage. So of course that then leaves the very obvious question about who Fred's real mother is, if the person in the picture is actually just a model. And what he points out is that she's most likely with Brad Childs. And Daphne quickly realizes that he's most likely talking about Judy Reeves, who is one of the two members of Mystery Incorporated that we haven't formally met yet. And sure enough, Fred Sr. does acknowledge this, pointing out that A, Judy Reeves is Fred's mother, but also B, points out that Brad Childs is actually Fred's biological father, and that's when this is the big twist, Fred, and obviously Fred Fred Jr. is actually not Fred Sr.'s father, but it goes up a little bit deeper than that, as we find out at one point. Brad and Judy tried to come back into Crystal Cove, this time married and with a son, but of course Fred Sr. couldn't let that happen. So what he did was he abducted their kid and pointed out that as long as they stayed as far away from Crystal Cove as humanly possible, he would keep their son safe. And of course this worked, but then he ultimately decided to raise the son for himself, and the son wound up being Fred Jones Jr., which of course causes Fred to just kind of go a little bit spiral a little bit, and pointing out that he's very much angry with his quote unquote dad right now. He then demands to have their piece of the Planispheric Disk back, but in case Fred is visibly very upset with his quote unquote father right now, and then proceeds to point and then demands to have their piece of the Planispheric Disk back. But Fred Sr. points out that even though obviously Fred has every right to be upset, but also points out that even if they're not related by blood, he still very much raised him like his own son, and points out that he is very much they are very much family regardless. But in actuality, Fred Jr. knows very well that his quote unquote father actually used him to keep Mystery Incorporated out of Crystal Cove. And but after doing a shakedown of Fred Sr., then quickly realizes that he doesn't have it, and notes that with Fred Sr. pointing out that that's impossible, and that they actually need to find that piece of the Planispheric Disk, because obviously it's very priceless. It leads to a treasure, and they obviously need to get it back. But Fred then points out that he risked all that trouble for a treasure that nobody is even entirely sure exists. And with that, he then goes to the cliffside to think, while Sheriff Stone picks up Fred Sr. and brings him back brings him back to prison, but proceeds to bring him to prison, but is also visibly heartbroken about the fact that he has to arrest his former boss, because admittedly, Fred Sr. was in fact one of his personal heroes. Of course, Sheriff Stone is going to be upset. A man he very much trusted wound up betraying the whole town, and he isn't entirely sure how to process that. And so, yeah, of course, Sheriff Stone is very visibly upset. But in any case, after being arrested, Daphne then proceeds to try and console Fred, and ask him if he's okay. But of course, he points out that he's very much not okay, and points out that basically his entire life is a lie. He has parents that he never even met, and he has no idea how to process that. So, and of course, Daphne then points out that whatever it is, they'll work through it together. But Fred points out that he's most likely going to be doing whatever it is he needs to get done alone, and then proceeds to break off his engagement with Daphne. Proceeds to explain that he's leaving Crystal Cove to go find his parents, and he probably won't come back until he finds them. And of course proceeds to leave, with Daphne being very distraught about the fact that Fred is leaving, and asks him what to do about what she's supposed to do and what Mystery Incorporated is supposed to do. But it's at this point where he very honestly announces that Mystery Incorporated is dead before storming off. And of course, Velma tries to console Daphne, but of course, Daphne immediately blames Velma for what was going on with them, and then proceeds to point out that if she had come clean about the whole Cassidy Williams thing a lot earlier, Fred might not be leaving right now, and Mr. Incorporated might still be together, which isn't really fair. To be honest, it's not really fair. I mean, to be fair, Velma did keep a secret from them, but it's not really one of those things that would have blown them up. But of course, Velma immediately tells Shaggy and Scooby to go and try and console Fred and stop him from leaving. And they do try to call out to him and go to try and stop him from leaving. But it's at this point where the Rogers actually step in and reveal that they've actually put through a lot of thought and are planning to send Shaggy to military school, which of course Shaggy is very visibly confused by, because obviously. And this obviously seems like a very extreme thing, but since Shaggy, I mean, to be fair, Shaggy has been arrested twice at this point, but he isn't really a bad kid. I should mention, he's not a bad kid. He's just lazy. But of course he has no idea. But of course Shaggy has no idea. Points out that he can't really go to military school, and pointing out that they'll need somebody to take care of Scooby. But it's at this point where they reveal that they've actually found a nice farm for Scooby to live on, and he'll likely be living there for the foreseeable future. And this of course causes Shaggy to kind of protest this whole thing, pointing out that obviously he's an eater, not a fighter. But of course this also causes Scooby to go sulk in the Rogers car, where he actually meets Professor Pericles, who is sitting in the back seat waiting for him. And of course does point out, and of course Scooby is not very happy to see Professor Pericles, but Professor Pericles tells him that he has nothing to fear now that he has what he came for, and then proceeds to pull out the gang's piece of this Planispheric Disk, which Scooby finally realizes that while everybody was busy dealing with the freak at Crystal Cove, Professor Pericles pocketed his piece and kept it for himself. And of course, Professor Pericles then reveals that he actually has both pieces, and that he actually only has 4 more to go. And with that, he then proceeds to open the window on the back of the Rogers car and flies out, with Scooby vowing on his name that he will get the gang back together and they will stop Professor Pericles. And then it ends with his whole signature "if his name isn't Scooby-Doo" thing. But yeah, this is a very harrowing episode to end the first season on. So. Yeah, first and foremost, Mystery Incorporated has been broken up in a very significant way. Obviously they originally broke up because Velma and Shaggy broke up, and that made things awkward. But they eventually worked things out and started working together again. This is a far more permanent way for the group to be broken up. Obviously now because the whole revelation about the freak of Crystal Cove and about how Fred Sr. isn't really Fred's biological father. That caused Fred to start rethinking some things about his life, and of course, he doesn't really. He's now no longer in a position to actually lead Mystery Incorporated, and is also breaking off his engagement with Daphne. And of course, because Velma withheld information about Cassidy Williams, that caused a rift between her and Daphne. And then because Shaggy is being sent to military school and Scooby's being sent to a farm, they are no longer in the picture either. So. yeah, Mr. Incorporated has basically just been broken up in a very permanent way, and that is going to be an interesting thing to actually deal with in the second season. But yeah, this episode does come with a couple of interesting revelations in it, and obviously there's the big thing about how there's a reason we haven't met Brad and Judy, and this was foreshadowed by something that Mr. E said a while ago about how Brad and Judy won't get involved so long as Fred Jones Jr. is alive. Now we know what he meant. They literally will not get involved because their son was abducted by the Freak of Crystal Cove. That is a big revelation that finally paid off, and yeah, I can fully understand why Fred needs to rethink some things. When you realize that the man who's raised you for about 18 years isn't really your father, and that your very existence is part of a larger conspiracy. Yeah, I can understand why Fred needs to actually think through some things. That is some Alex Jones conspiracy stuff right there. That is yeah, I can understand why Fred needs to think through some things, and I'm not totally sure where the second season is going to go with this, because obviously I'm not going to be reviewing the second season for a while yet. But yeah, that was a very big revelation to end the series on for the time being, and yeah, that's a very interesting episode to end on. But in any case, yeah, that's my review of Scooby-Doo, Mr. Incorporated. What did you guys think? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. Be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well if you want to help support the show. It's only a couple bucks a month. It does really help me out, and you guys get access to a bunch of cool perks that I'm always saying thanks. So be sure to check those out. Link is down in the description. And finally, if you want to see more content from me, then be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. The top video is the most recent one, and may or may not be this one. Whereas the bottom video is a video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me. So if you want to try something new, or see more of what you like, then be sure to check both of those videos out. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace!